Welcome everyone again. Some of you may think it's a déjà vu to see me again, but it is all according to the schedule. I'm not alone. My colleague Rafał Kuchta is here with me, and we will give you a presentation that it's like a twin presentation to Lech's presentation, but we will add some specific issues to what was said before. So it will be a complementary information. We have the application of distributed ledger technology in public sector. There are several applications. Lech mentioned some of them. We want to make a thesis that the public sector is a key for the development of blockchain technology, not in terms of the technological aspects on which the IT specialists work, but in terms of application and implementation into the society. It's a key element, and whether I'm right, we will see. I see three areas here in terms of the lawmaking, in terms of the supervision, and thirdly, as the service provider, because the public sector has these three important aspects. We want to address two issues. One is more general, and we will refer to what Lech mentioned. That will be the future of blockchain regulations, how they can influence the function of the public sector as the lawmaker and regulator. And then Rafał will say about the trusted services and the future of blockchain in terms of identification. So when it comes to the first topic of the future of blockchain regulation, the standard way of making law is to write the provisions of law. It's not a surprise, but the classical format is to write the text of law in following a particular procedure, then publish it in adequate places, and this is basically described as law as a rule. The characteristic features of this way of making law is that the law can be not obeyed, and the rule can be not obeyed. Then the system foresees particular mechanisms. When somebody breaks the law, the procedure is initiated as foreseen by the rule. So whether it's administrative law or penal law, if there is an activity that's not compliant with the rule, the system foresees the subsequent procedures. Nevertheless, the system is not able to prevent it. It can only react to it. That can be the prosecutor activities or whatever. Then the system, law as a rule, is managed in a specific way because it is not able to prevent the law being disobeyed. That's why they can only implement the mechanisms to bring the situation back to its initial situation. So, what is the influence of blockchain on the understanding of lawmaking? There's a new idea. What if we regulate the procedures not by the provisions that are written, but as the code? The Bitcoin and blockchain showed us that it is possible to have highly advanced economic systems that operate without any provision of law, in the classical understanding of law as a rule. Bitcoin is just a first example. DAO, which was mentioned several times during this conference, brings this whole discussion on a higher level of abstract thinking. There are the economic systems that are highly developed, and they have specific economic features, and they don't need any standard procedures of activity that are understood as law, as a rule. It does not mean that they are chaotic and not follow the rules. They follow the rules strictly, but they are not the written provisions of law. Here, the new concept is described as law as a code. So all the provisions, all the rules are in the code. The systems differ in the fact that in law as a code has different consequences. We cannot say that we have to bring back the situation into initial state. In case of Bitcoin, let's say, it is not possible to make a fraud like in a traditional banking system. So it's not possible to have double spending like in classical banks, where the bank has to initiate the procedures to neutralize the consequences of the fraud. In case of Bitcoin, it is not possible right from the start, because impossibility of double spending is included in the very code. The second difference is that if we want to change the way of functioning, the element of the system, we need to change the code. Bitcoin or DAO show that it's not easy because some consensus of all the stakeholders is required. So we have a situation where these two systems collide. They both function, and blockchain showed that the law as a code is powerful. It's not only a theory of a computer code, but they are real and they provide stimuli to how people behave, what people do. They provide economic stimuli, and they make people mine the bitcoins or spend them. The problem is then how to regulate the system based on blockchain technology in a system which has classical tools of law as a rule system. BitLicense is an example of a classical solution. It is a license for the entities that operate in the digital currencies area that is valid in New York. So everybody that wants to operate in this market is obliged to submit an application. If the application meets some requirements, the license can be given. Is it effective? The example of DAO shows that it's not entirely effective. It is very difficult to attribute DAO to any jurisdiction or any country in which the classical rules should be applied. So even if a link with a particular country is applied, then the law does not foresee how the opportunity for the public sector to address these problems is to use law as a code rules. An example of this trend is seen in the RegTech. This is a name that makes reference to fintech, which is the financial technologies. Well, here it's a concept that if in the financial sector there is fintech, which are the companies that use technology to very dynamically change this sector, let's use the rules to apply to them to have effective control over them. For instance, well, that is may obvious. This could be the obligation to report particular things thanks to using the technology. And this is law as a code in a very preliminary stage, because this reporting obligation has to be done using a technology. And that's based on the programmer's code. That generates a lot of problems because there's still an issue of how regulate, let's say, DAO. And we are faced with this issue still. If DAO is based on an economic system with a plugin, then there's another one created without this plugin. Excuse me, let's move one step backwards. Before having law as a code or law as a rule, we've got two systems in the European Union. In Poland or in Germany, there is a system based on constitution, but in the UK, there is the common law. So it's based on the habit or tradition. So how would you refer to this? Yes, this is very general understanding that there is no constitution in the UK, and this meaning that it's the supreme act of law. But the law in UK is distributed in some way. Several aspects are regulated. Yes, let's move back in how to join under one system of European Union. People want to make business based on Bitcoin, for example. How should they operate? Should they seek financial or legal support in the city of London or in Luxembourg? In terms of financial sector, it doesn't really matter because it is all regulated in detail in acts of law. Let's move on. I want to add my last conclusion. There are obvious difficulties in implementing law as a code, but it's important to realize that they will not replace law as a rule, because we need this link with the reality. So the Bitcoin blockchain, for example, may have some regulatory mechanisms, but it will function under one blockchain. It is not related to real people, real situations that may happen. Let's hear from Rafał right now. I want to make reference to what Jacek said, because he said about supervision, and supervision can be a form of building trust on the market. So when it comes to trust, the state has a more basic role to play. About Mr. Wilczyński already mentioned, this is the identity attestation. It is stating that our counterparties or the people with whom we do business, they are effectively those who they present themselves as. We operate now based on the plastic identity documents. Some time ago, a regulation of the European Parliament and the Council was adopted, and it refers to electronic identification and authentication services. It's a long name, but the abbreviated name is eIDAS. This regulation has two general areas that are covered, and on one hand it mentions electronic identification, and on the other hand it covers trusted services. Now I will tell you about both of these areas, but I will only focus on electronic signature when it comes to trusted services. Let's remember that this regulation will enter into force very soon, especially the provisions that refer to trusted services. They enter into force on the 1st of July this year, so this is next month. So we have electronic identification, which is an area covered by this public administration. And here, to give you an introduction, we've got some definitions. There are several levels of security. The highest is the qualified electronic signature. It is an advanced electronic signature, which is placed using the qualified device for electronic signature, and it's based on a qualified certificate for electronic signature. And the device for placing electronic signature means a configured software or hardware that is used to place the electronic signature. And there are several options of how we can place an electronic signature. Anyway, a public administration may use the adequate software to check whether the person that they are dealing with or the company have the identity which they present. The first basic purpose of the eIDAS regulation is to give the access to online services that are provided by the public administration. It is acceptable as well that the member states decide individually what services they will provide online, and it covers both the range of services and the requirements that have to be filled. The member states can give a possibility to private companies to use their platforms for electronic identification or electronic identification services to identify and authenticate their business partners. And the public administration may charge the companies for that services. eIDAS covers electronic identification as well in terms of mutual recognition of the means of identification. So there is a developed system of notification of electronic signatures, and the European Commission will analyze the submitted proposals for electronic identification tools and certify them and include them in a special list. So as a result, when a particular business person from one particular state uses a device for electronic identification and they want to move their activity or extend their activity to another member state, they do not need to set up or apply for the evidence to the local evidence of their identity. They can register business activity in another country or pay taxes or report to the relevant authorities based on their electronic signature. And it doesn't apply only to business entities, it applies as well to individuals who can use it for their own purposes while dealing with public administration. I heard that eIDAS was wrongly implemented in Poland. It was not implemented yet fully, but what I heard was that there were mistakes in translation, and apparently the words identification and authentication were treated synonymously. Well, it's difficult for me now to refer to this. Well, I heard that as well, that this problem was solved at the level of the act that implements the regulation. The regulation will be entering into force gradually until September 2018. Yes, at the end of 2018, the notification system will be obligatory, and until then, it will be facultative. I have a question. Will the electronic signature replace plastic identity documents? Not necessarily. They can function in parallel. So, can I be treated as a resident of a particular country if I have an electronic signature? It will depend on particular provisions of that member state. Well, Estonia created a notion of e-residency. So every member state will be able to regulate their use, the modalities of using electronic signatures. Let's come back to the regulation itself. It will be implemented directly, and from the 1st of July it will enter into force. But some work is necessary to adapt our law to this regulation. That's why the authorities need to foresee a system for the supervision. And right now, Polish Act of Law is being proceeded, and this legislative process is ongoing. The Parliament hasn't adopted it yet. Let's come back to electronic signature. I will keep it short. Well, there are several levels of security of electronic signature. The highest one is with the qualified electronic signature. It's an advanced signature, and it meets some very technical requirements that are in the eIDAS. Another issue is the device that is qualified to place the electronic signature, and it can be based only either on software or hardware, or there can be a combination of both solutions. There is also a notion of qualified certificate. So we can treat this the qualified signature is like a handwritten signature, and the device is like a pen which we use, and the certificate is like the hand that is attributed to the particular person. And to address the question that was asked in Lech Wilczyński's presentation, I can tell you that electronic signature placed with a qualified device will be equivalent to handwritten signature. Every member state will be able to define the particular technological details, but when we sign a document in an electronic way, we confirm that the contents is originated by us and we agree to it. I don't have it here on the slide, but the eIDAS stipulates that electronic signature has the force of the evidence, and it cannot be refused in court only on the basis that it is electronic. Can it be compromised? Well, let's wait when I get to the supervision, and I can tell you now that there are cases where the signature can be treated as invalid. It seems to me that the software can be problematic here. A signature can be compromised. Yes, I will get to that point while discussing supervision, but basically there is a system of notification of these incidents or events, and a signature is then treated as invalid, or the certificate is treated as invalid. So there are many technical details that are important in this area. So it is important. And how does that refer to blockchain? When we want to address the identity that's based on blockchain, there is the whole discussion. Let's move from Bitcoin a bit and let's look at blockchain that is the basis for it. We can base the identity, the electronic identity on blockchain and use it for the authentication purposes as electronic signature. Here we can have a look at this area from the perspective of two levels. The first level is the regulation itself, and EIDAS assumes technological neutral. It has a neutral character when it comes to technology, so the member states choose the technology themselves. And the member states are free to design and monitor their own systems. The state may be in charge of making the system on its own. They can subcontract it to a private company, or they can even, let's imagine, agree with other member states and develop a common system that would be based on blockchain. So when it comes to electronic signature that is qualified, the provision of these services requires the status of qualified provider of trusted services, and that requires registration and ensuring security level, regular reporting, and notification of incidents, security incidents that are related to signatures, and these entities will be very strongly regulated. Once they are certified, they can use the logo that you see here on the slide. On the second level, which is the level of executory provisions, we know that every case should be analyzed independently, and we cannot say that all electronic signatures based on blockchain will be valid, because we need to check what type of blockchain it is. So this is all that I wanted to present to you today. Just let me add some statistics at the end. The directive that preceded EIDAS, it was the electronic signature directive. And last year, let me check my notes, we had 360 active certificates for qualified electronic signatures. So if we compare it, it was 360,000, but when you compare it to the turnover in Poland, it's really fractional. Yes, sometimes the business people need to use it for reporting. Can you please tell one more thing? I have a question about the corporate signature. Yes, I shortened my presentation because we don't have much time, but this is regulated in EIDAS as other trusted services, and there is possibility to use timestamping and other ways of ensuring credibility, but it is attestation from what source data come, but it's not an electronic signature. It was a regulatory kind of answer to several challenges in the business sector, banking sector, that appeared over time when we wanted to ensure security and high level of trust among the involved parties. So yes, from on the 1st of July, another provisions will enter into force. That's the situation as of today. We can add as well that the trusted profile, which is called in the updated Act of Law in Poland, it's called electronic signature. It will not be notified in other member states because of some details. It will stay in Poland for internal administration purposes. Thank you, gentlemen.